Tara, you can just think about and recite Tam, 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 like entering and resonating in your heart. You can do that with Hung, with Medicine Buddha. So there's different traditions that you can do this with. And that's particularly within this Kriya Yogic tradition. And each figure or each yidam or deity that you're working with within this tradition has kind of their own individual features and individual sort of healing abilities. So, Amitabha has his Pure Land, and Vajrapani is really excellent for like cleansing and purity and gaining specific clarity of mind that comes from having purity and having cleansed certain things. So you become more omniscient and more sort of, I guess you could say, psychic powers, really, through the Vajrapani practice. And then Chenrezi practice, for example, helps you to develop compassion in a greater sense. And Medicine Buddha, of course, and like white Tara are particular to healing, and green Tara is also particular towards compassion and transcending fears. So there's lots of different ways that you can look at it, but within this tradition, each one of these yidams kind of has their own thing. And so that's when I'm always telling people, there's a reason that not everybody has the same yidam. Because if you want to follow the Buddhist way of thinking and think that this isn't your first rodeo, right, in this particular bag of bones that you happen to be inhabiting of stardust this time around, that essentially we all have a stream of consciousness that's propelled us forward for a very long time, eons, and that we're developing that, and that we say, depending on which tantra you're going to look at, you're going to say either there's 72,000 different, mind states, or 84,000, depending on which one you're looking at. I tend to hang out in the 84,000 different camp. And that matches the 84,000 different channels in your body. So when you have that many states of mind, what works for me and what works for you is going to be completely different, because our mind streams have developed over different eons, and different deities kind of wake things up. So when people ask, like, well, how do I know what deity I need to practice? It's like you just keep trying different ones until you find the right one. It's not like, and sometimes you're really lucky and you have an enlightened being for a guru and they're like, do this practice, and you're like, okay. But not every one of us has that opportunity to have an enlightened being sort of instruct us in that way. We're really lucky if we do, but oftentimes we're like, I don't know. But we feel something when we do a particular yidam or a particular practice, and that resonates deeply within our own mind stream. And so it's really important to be able to not have, it sounds funny, not have a lot of attachment about what practice you're doing. A lot of times people really want like the special bells and whistles, and they want this practice and the fire puja and the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, and then you can also just completely become enlightened by saying Om Mani Padme Hum with Chenrezi, and that's okay too. And there's not one that's better than the other. And there's not like, I don't like the terms lesser vehicle and higher vehicle, because that sort of says that there's this level. It's like, no, that's why when the Buddha was alive and teaching, he could just hold up a flower and look at somebody and they became enlightened, and everybody else is like, what's he doing? What's he talking about? I have no idea. So it's really important to understand that different yidams and different deities awaken different principles within inside yourself. So today we're talking about Green Tara, but that's true of every single one of them. So a lot of times in the West, people think that tantric practitioners are only doing the special internal practices that one does when they go through certain levels of initiations and they complete certain things and then they do the next level and the next level. But that's not true. Like, everybody is doing some form of Kriya practice. But there's many different levels to Kriya Tantra. It's a very long and involved path, and there's lots of complicated practices within it. So there's always like a simplified version and then like a really complex version. So, for example, with Medicine Buddha, right? So we have, the outer, the inner, and the secret, and we have certain particular empowerments that only come after a long period of time. And then same thing, there can be like the white Tara practice. There's like a very long fire offering that goes with the white Tara practice, and you have to literally sit down and do 10,000 mantras in one sitting. Like, you can't get up, like you can't stop while you're doing this fire puja in order to do it correctly. So you can do shortened versions of Kriya Tantra, and you can do very extended versions of Kriya Tantra. And so it's not this idea that it's this shortcut or simplified thing. It's just different ways of doing it. And so I think there's a misperception within Western Buddhism that somehow like green Tara is just this simple little, practice, or Medicine Buddha doesn't really mean very much, it's just for healing, or, white Tara is just for, long life, and that's all she does. And it's like, no, it's a lot more complicated than that. But most of us don't have enough resuscitation of the basics to be able to go to the next level. So that's something that you have to like work with individually with your teacher when they tell you you're ready to do those things. So in all 4 classes of Tantra, all of them you have different visualizations of a Buddha figure, and they all have their own mandalas. And these are all of their palaces where they hang out and they live, and their environments, and so we can all sort of look at those. And then they also have multiple figures that live inside their palaces or their mandalas. And also, all of these receive offerings. So in all 4 classes, you also make offerings, those 7 different offerings. And there's, in the Kriya tradition, there's outer offerings, right? And then only in really high tantric practice are there also inner and secret offerings. So also there's a certain level of accumulation that's required in retreat for all of them. So if you receive a full empowerment, for example, there's a number of mantras that you should perform and do, and you just have to keep doing them. So like, sometimes I'll assign people a mantra and I'll say do 100,000 of this and then come back, and then once you've completed that, and then that's pretty typical. So those are within all of those 4 classes. And then each of these also have empowerments, or like an initiation, usually done with a mandala. And also, of course, you have the Vajra disciple empowerment, which is like a vase empowerment. And then you have the water empowerment, and you have the crown empowerment. So there's different types of empowerment. And I know that the Khenpos can give those. If somebody wants them, they have to request them. But just know that when you're requesting an empowerment, in order to give a transmission, it requires hours and hours for the sort of Vajra master to be able to perform and complete everything they need to do first in order to give that to you, because they have to visualize themselves. And then once you have sort of done a certain level of mantra accumulation, so there's what we call Jainam, which means like permission, like special subsequent permissions that come. And this is within the Kriya Yoga tradition, or Kriya Tantra, sorry. And these are all given with Torma. So those like, the sampa, so like a white torma ritual cake, generated, which represents the Buddha figure itself. And then people need to understand that in order for that to happen, you have to be willing to make certain vows to do in all 4 of these classes of tantras. There's a certain vow, or we call this damsik in Tibetan, which it means like a commitment to do these practices. And sometimes people get really overwhelmed, like they don't want more practices. Like I'm one of those actually. I don't like to go to a lot of different empowerments. I have my few practices that I do, and that's enough for me. I don't need more because I don't want to have too many commitments. So, but you can also make a commitment, like I'm going to do this once a month on this day. And actually Tara is practiced on the same day as Medicine Buddha. You seeing a big connection here? Mm-hmm. So it's also practiced on the 8th lunar day of the month. So you could do either Medicine Buddha, or you could do Tara, or you could do both. So sometimes if you're going to make a commitment to do a practice, even just saying I'm going to do this once a season, or once a month, or once a week, that's fine, but you need to hold to that. So always it's good to start with 100,000 mantras first. And then once you do that, and then you receive special instructions from your gurus, then all 4 classes of these have something known as self-initiation. So this is not really talked about in the West either. And this means that after you've done retreat, after you've done like the pujas, the fire pujas, then you can do self-initiation yourself. Meaning that it's very long and complicated to do this. It's very difficult. So there's self-generation, or generating oneself as the mandala, and the Buddha figures inside the mandala within your own body. And then there's also front generation, where the mandala is going to arise, and you will receive the empowerment from the mandala itself. And then there's a generation of the vase, meaning that within the mandala there will be a vase that will appear, and that becomes like the instrument of receiving the empowerment. And then there's an empowerment ritual in itself. So just as we go to a qualified master to receive a full wang or an empowerment, once you have attained a certain level with any of these practices, then you can do self-initiation. And typically in Tibet, very high practitioners will do self-initiation when they know that they're close to death, because that's said to be very good to sort of clean and purify everything. And so it's really important to just know that this self-initiation is not really talked about, because especially in the West, with our high propensity towards egocentric action, I think a lot of us would think like, oh, I'm ready to do self-initiation. Like, I'm not going to be ever doing self-initiation in this lifetime. There's no way. No way. I know. It's not going to happen. So I think it's really important to realize that if you, like, well, for one thing, I'm too busy. I can't go into lifetime retreat. Like, somebody can go into lifetime retreat, maybe they can do that. But it's really, you have to know what your limits are, but you're also unlimited in what you can do with this practice. So you can have it be on a very simple relative level where it's helping you with like fears and generating compassion and swiftly acting in an enlightened manner. Or you can go all the way through until you don't actually need a guru, because you're so in harmony with that yidam completely, and you've done all of the proper accumulations and fire pujas and everything in a very long form over many years, and then you can then do self-initiation yourself. So you don't need to go to receive an empowerment. You can give yourself your own empowerment. So I have heard the Khenpos talk about this a little tiny bit, but it's not talked about very often, but just know that you are unlimited in the potential that you possess, and you're unlimited in the potential that you possess because you're already enlightened with Buddha nature, you just forgot. So, or it's covered up. So in terms of being vegetarian when doing this practice, it's just aiding the cleanliness and that sort of ritualistic ability to cleanse. So typically they avoid eggs because in Asia the chickens are just like doing their chicken thing and they kind of roam around, so you don't know if the eggs are fertile or not. So the question comes like, okay, can we have eggs here in the West? Well, if you know they're not fertile, like I have my own eggs and I don't got any boys, so it could be fine, but it's also still coming from an animal. So this morning I had oatmeal. But we consider, has everyone heard of the 3 white substances or the 3 white offerings? Sometimes like if people are doing like Naga offerings and so forth, we call this the Kar Sum. Kar means white and Sum means 3. So the 3 white offerings are yogurt, butter, and milk. Okay? So